In the beginning, long before there were any people, plants, or animals on this land, Beeme, the spirit of our ancestral being, lived up in the sky. He came down and formed and shaped the land. He created the rivers, the mountains, the forests, the mangroves, and the creeks, the seashore, the cliffs, and other places of great significance and sacredness. It is he who gave the people the laws of their life, their traditions, their dance, their art, and their songs. When the work of the creation was completed, Beeme returned to the sky. The people called him the Sky Hero, or All-Father. What you have just heard is part of the Gadigal dreaming. The dreaming is a complex term essentially referring to the every-when in Aboriginal cultural context. The dreaming never ends. Even today, in this very moment, the Gadigal dreaming is all around us. This dreaming has important significance to us, especially as University of Sydney students, as we pay respect to the Gadigal clan for the land, which the university sits on today. Touring Sydney as an exchange student, oftentimes you can forget that this pristine environment was utilized and harvested for thousands of years before Europeans ever came into contact with it. With so many modern marvels just in the city center, such as the Opera House or the Harbour Bridge, one can forget that the harbour was once just a protected bay that provided food and shelter for the multiple clans living there. With this project, we aim to not only pay respect to these groups, as well as Mother Earth, but show how the Aboriginal Australian culture is still alive and thriving today.
The University of Sydney is located in an area that has a rich Aboriginal history, and many community members still maintain deep connections to the land. This is most apparent right outside of Redfern train station, one of the most frequented stations by University of Sydney students. In the 1920s, many Aboriginal people migrated from rural areas to Redfern, seeking work. For the next 4 decades, many successful Aboriginal established services and centers were founded in Redfern. It became a piece of significant country land for the people. This connection is still maintained today, as evidenced by the Redfern Tent Embassy that formed just across the street from the station. The people that warm the ceremonial sacred fire at this embassy do so in order to bring attention to the fact that the Australian government still has not recognized many of the sacred lands as Aboriginal. Bob Randall, a Yanahutara elder and traditional owner of Uluru, or Ayers Rock, helps to explain why the land is so significant to the Aboriginal people of Australia.
But of course, bush living was bush. You totally took most of your things from the land you're on. We just lived on the land as people of the land. To us, it was a natural way of being. Being part of all that there is was just the way you was. You didn't see anything any different from you. It was just a way of life that was inclusive of all that there is through life. Life is the binding and the connecting way the oneness is. If you're alive, you connect to everything else that is alive.
Although property and land rights are currently considered the most prevalent political issue within Aboriginal social circles, just a few decades ago, these mobs were fighting for even more basic human rights. Just this past week on university campus, the 2015 Freedom Ride celebration was held honoring the 50th anniversary of the 1965 Freedom Ride. Led by an Aboriginal man named Charles Perkins, a group of University of Sydney students traveled by bus through New South Wales to protest racial discrimination against Aboriginal people. In 1965, Perkins was one of only 2 Aboriginal students attending the University of Sydney. He advocated heavily for increased rights for Aboriginal people, and the Freedom Ride trip exposed various acts of discrimination such as limited Aboriginal access to halls, swimming pools, movie theaters, hotels, and many other places all across New South Wales. Their trip was highly publicized, and Perkins became a national Aboriginal spokesman and leader. The Freedom Ride event last week was a fantastic commemoration that paid respect to this important moment in history and some extremely influential Sydney Uni alumni.
Prior to European invasions, the land in Sydney looked and sounded much different than it does today. This is because the Sydney Aboriginal people lived off the land and had a much different land ethic than the Europeans. While Europeans saw the land as a commodity that should be exploited, the Aboriginal people regarded it in a spiritual way. Each landscape was something that was created and shaped by their spiritual ancestors. These ancestors were the curators of the land and provided the instructions for how the people should live their lives. They lived in a holistic way and emulated the patterns of nature. For example, the ridges in the tree trunk would provide a blueprint of what we would recognize today as a canoe.
This past Sunday, I attended the Rocks Aboriginal Dreamtime Tour, led by Margaret, an Aboriginal sunrise woman. She taught me that her beliefs are based around the idea that everything in nature is interconnected, and that humans and nature are one. While the Europeans looked to privatize the land around them, Aboriginal people believed that the land was not owned, one belonged to the land. It is such an integral part of the Aboriginal culture that it even distinguishes one's totem. Every human being has a responsibility for something that Mother Earth has given to them. For example, the flower that blooms during my birth is my responsibility, my totem. During that season, it is my job to protect that entity, just as I would protect myself. It is essential for Aboriginal people to maintain a close tie to their ancestral land. Without this connection, they essentially lose their identity.
Although much of the Aboriginal land identity that was originally associated with Sydney has diminished, there are pockets of land that recreate and commemorate Aboriginal culture. For example, the Cattigem Ora Botanical Garden displays the original native vegetation that was around the Sydney Harbour. This vegetation would have been a major part of the Cadigal people's food, shelter, utensils, and weapons. Around the garden there is also artwork that depicts the history of Sydney from the creation to the present from an Aborigines perspective. This display is not imposing and fits naturally into the landscape. Thus, the design of the garden parallels the unimposing lifestyle of Aboriginal people.
When you're walking around the university campus and throughout Sydney, stop to consider the history of the land and what came before places like the Opera House, the shops, the restaurants, and all the other things that are such a normal, integral part of our lives. This land has a history and a story that goes way beyond what we see today. Every human being of whatever origin, of whatever culture, deserves respect. This starts with acknowledging the deep connection that the Aboriginal people have with the land and the fact that Australia's history did not start when Captain Cook landed. Participating in celebrations such as the Freedom Ride Anniversary, Anzac Day, Harmony Day, or one of the many other events in Sydney is a great way to show your support of Aboriginal culture.
And I think it's time for us to stand up, and be counted, to come together as a people, as we always have, and be strong and, stick up for our brothers and sisters in WA or wherever they might be, because, next it'll be us.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Hetty Perkins.
Listen to the birds, watch them fly. Hear them singing, soaring high into the sky. Watching the sunrise, what a sight. We shall all have peace. We shall all have peace one day. And in our hearts, if we do believe, we shall all have peace one day.
Serena, Shannon, and I are proud to acknowledge Aboriginal people as the traditional owners of this land. Amidst all the conveniences of modern-day life, it's easy to forget that we are just one species that inhabits this planet. So go outside, look around you, get inspired, and remember those who walked these steps before you.
We all